The photo, which had been taken half a year ago, was just a snapshot from one of Athena's surgeries. The subject was wearing a surgical cap, and their body was fully covered. All one could tell was that it was a slightly chubby woman. She was looking down at her work with cat-like eyes, her gaze focused and serious. Justin thought those eyes looked a little familiar. But just as quickly as the thought occurred to him, he dismissed it. The physique of the woman next door didn't match. It wasn't her. As Justin racked his brains for an answer, next door, Mrs. Lewis was pushing Nora to go to bed. "Nora, you can't do late nights with your poor health. You need more sleep than other people, not less. I can't allow you to stay up any later." Nora stretched and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Okay." Although she had recovered from her illness 5 years ago, her constitution was weak and she had little energy. She needed a full 12 hours of sleep every night. During her time abroad, her aunt had even nicknamed her the Queen of Sleep. If she didn't have a reason to get up, she could just sleep straight through 3 days and 3 nights. The next morning, she was woken up by the sound of her phone ringing. She answered the call with her eyes closed. She could hear Angela's voice on the other end. "Have you thought any more about giving me the company?" "Not really." Angela softened her tone, as if trying to sound charitable. "How about this? Let's both take a step back. I'll give you $500,000 if you transfer the company to me. That would be a good trade, right?" Nora turned over and found a comfortable position, but still did not open her eyes. Idelian Pharmaceuticals' annual net income was approximately $5 million. It had been handed to her father as her nominal guardian for the last few years, but the company really belonged to her. Although the money didn't mean all that much to her, she wasn't about to just give her mother's company away. Angela continued, sarcasm creeping into her voice. "Does your aunt even have $100,000 saved up after all her hard work? This is $500,000 we're talking about. You've probably never seen that much money in your life, right?" Nora pressed her lips together, silently amused. The presidential suite cost $100,000 per night. Her aunt had been so concerned about ensuring Cherry's comfort while Nora looked for a house that she had booked an entire month's stay. Angela couldn't be more wrong. When Nora didn't respond, Angela changed her strategy. "Nora, you might not know this, but that company isn't making any money at all. It'll go bankrupt soon. If you transfer the company to me, there may still be a chance to make it profitable." In her mind, Nora laughed at her sister's lie. Angela went on. "It's a pharmaceutical company. You were never great in school. You wouldn't get it. I'm a high-achieving medical student, and I've got a ton of professional knowledge. I'm even going to apply to study as a postgraduate student under Professor Athena. Athena is the most amazing surgeon in the world, and they can perform even the most difficult operations. They're a legend. They're really mysterious, though. Boston University has gone to a lot of trouble to get them to come over to be a professor there. I don't even know why I'm bothering to explain this to you. It's not like you understand what I'm saying. Nora, just quit while you're ahead. Don't stick to a bad decision just to make a point. The company will only go bankrupt faster." Nora knitted her brows in annoyance. "You talk too much." Agitated, Angela demanded, "What do you mean by that?" She wasn't bothering with trying to sound nice anymore. "Are you pretending to be dumb because you don't want to cancel the engagement? Anthony loves me for my looks and my brains. Even if you don't give me the company as a wedding gift, he'll still marry me all the same. So do you want to do this the easy way or the hard way?" Nora hung up and tossed the cell phone aside. She hugged her pillow and fell into a deep sleep once more. Angela's threats were ridiculous. The Smith family was full of monsters. Nora refused to waste her time worrying about them. After finishing up her 12 hours of sleep, Nora finally forced herself to get out of bed. She needed to find a private investigator to look for clues about her son's whereabouts. She got dressed and prepared to go out. At the door, Cherry gave her a very quick hug before going straight back to the game she was playing. Nora called after her, "Don't play games on your phone all day. I don't want you ruining your eyesight." "Ha! That's 4 kills! Got you, dummy!" Cherry's hand tapped away quickly on the phone she was holding. When she heard her mum, she nodded without even looking up. "Okay, don't worry, Mum, I'll take care of Mrs. Lewis." Nora shook her head. Cherry clearly wasn't listening to her at all. After a moment's hesitation, Nora added, "There's a very difficult person next door. Try not to go outside." Cherry's eyes immediately widened with interest. "Is he a monster, Mummy?" Justin's arrogant face appeared in her mind. Nora, who had always been reserved by nature, said slowly, "Well, this monster is very handsome and has a mole in the corner of his eye, but it seems that his brain isn't working very well." "Oh," Cherry waved. "I definitely won't go out then. I don't play with dummies." Nora laughed as she closed the door and got ready to go to the elevator. But as she turned, she immediately froze. Without her even realizing it, Justin had come to stand behind her. He was so tall he made the spacious hallway seem cramped. His dark eyes were staring at her, and even the mole at the corner of his eye seemed to exude a bone-deep chill. He was probably going out. An assistant and a bodyguard followed behind him. There were only the three of them, but his presence was no weaker than it had been during their encounter in the lobby the previous evening. Nora raised her eyebrows. To be fair, her aunt had given her 1,000 reminders and warnings before she returned to the States. Nora knew her aunt could protect her from most people, no matter what she said. However, Nora also knew that no one could mess with Justin Hunt. She had sent him a sarcastic message as Athena last night. That had been easy to do from a distance, but now... Nora cast her cat-like eyes down slightly and said casually, "Mr. Hunt, I was just joking with my daughter. I definitely wasn't talking about you." Mr. Hunt's assistant, Lawrence, fought to keep from laughing, but the corner of his lips twitched a little. He couldn't believe how this woman dared to lie to Mr. Hunt's face. He had heard everything she had said about the monster with a mole at the corner of its eye. She hadn't said it aloud, but it was clear that monster's last name was Hunt. There was no visible emotion on Justin's face. He was rarely expressive, which made it difficult for people to know what he was thinking. He merely cast a long look at Nora before taking the lead and walking ahead. Nora hung back deliberately to let Hunt's group take the elevator and put some distance between them. Once they were gone, she let out a sigh of relief. That man had only given her a simple glance just now, but she could feel the fury in his look. He was trouble. It was best she stayed far away from him. In the elevator, Justin narrowed his eyes slightly. He hadn't been able to see clearly in the dim lighting the night before, but running into her today, he could see she was astonishingly pretty. She kept her cat-like eyes turned down demurely, and her curly eyelashes were long and black. She appeared sweet and docile, but a wild energy seemed to crackle from out of nowhere. Something about her felt familiar, particularly the way she stung him with such polite insults. Back in the Hunt suite, Pete waited until he was sure his father was gone. He was a little afraid of his father sometimes. In his head, he thought of the man as a demon lord. Once he was sure the coast was clear, he dialed the neighbouring room's phone extension. Someone picked up and he heard a young voice say, "Hello?" Pete paused. "I'm staying next door. Can I come over and visit you?" The little girl sounded surprised. "Oh, are you the little dummy from next door?" Pete was shocked into silence. He was used to everyone knowing him as a genius and a prodigy. This was the first time someone had called him a dummy. However, the little girl quickly spoke again. "Can you play games with me?" A light twinkled in Pete's dark eyes, and he replied, "Yes, I can." Hotel Finest was the most prestigious hotel in California. It was lavishly decorated, and the clean marble floor reflected light. Everything looked decadent and expensive, a hint of the great wealth of the owners. Anthony sat on a sofa in the lobby, staring at the elevator doors and waiting. The hotel management was strict, and the front desk had refused to sell him guest information. He had no other choice but come early and wait, hopeful that he could find the woman. His hard work paid off, and he jumped to his feet when he saw her gracefully exit the elevator. He presented her with a bouquet of fresh roses and blocked her path in what he thought was a charming manner. "Hello, beautiful. What a wonderful coincidence. I didn't expect us to meet again." Nora was irritated. She knew he didn't recognize her, and it was all a long time ago, but they'd annulled their engagement. Why was this guy suddenly showing up everywhere she went? Anthony didn't notice her annoyance and said with a smile, "It seems like we're destined to be. Surely you'll tell me your name." Nora narrowed her eyes. She hadn't intended to pay any attention to him, but then she thought of how he'd been in the delivery room when she'd given birth. He must remember something about what had happened. Perhaps she could sound him out. Isabel Anderson. Anderson was her mother's surname. Anthony's eyes lit up. "Are you free, Miss Anderson? How about a coffee? There's a cafe next door." She nodded in agreement, and he eagerly set off. "Just this way, Miss Anderson. By the way, where's your sister?" She frowned slightly. "My sister?" "Yes, that little girl with you at the airport yesterday. You only look about 20. You can't possibly have a daughter that age, right?" He clearly thought he was being charming. Nora kept quiet. She couldn't explain and risk revealing who she was. "It's just as well she's not here. She won't bother us. The cakes from the cafe are pretty good. You can bring some back for her." The way to impress a woman is to please everyone around her, thought Anthony smugly. Nearby, Justin, who'd been inspecting the hotel, stared at them coldly. Behind him, Lawrence, his assistant, sneered. "That woman's too much, Mr. Hunt. Never mind that she deliberately approached Pete to meet you. Now she's flirting with someone else. What is she up to? And she referred to her daughter as her sister when she was lying to that man. I don't see her putting in that much effort when she was lying to you." Justin's expression darkened. A sharp look flashed across his deep-set eyes, and the temperature of the entire lobby seemed to drop a few degrees. He said frostily, "Look her up." "Yes, sir." After walking into the cafe, Nora found a table by the window. She quickly turned the topic of conversation to Anthony's engagement. He was keen to explain himself. "I'm not really a scumbag, Miss Anderson. You don't know how ugly she was. Her face was so fat you could barely see her eyes. When she walked, it was like the whole place shook. She used this excuse that her obesity was due to hormonal injections. She thought she'd be a beauty if she slimmed down. She was also ignorant. She dropped out of school in the 3rd grade and stayed home, cooping herself up in her room. She didn't even complain when she was punished or scolded, much less retaliate. But the worst of it was she ended up pregnant with another man's child. How could I possibly marry her? I didn't trust her. It would have been unfair to expect me to marry an uneducated, illiterate, obese liar like that, wouldn't it?" Nora drifted off as she listened to him. She'd known since childhood that crying and making a fuss were useless in a home like hers. She'd never fought back when she was punished because she'd always kept her mother's last words firmly in her mind. "You must seem plain and mediocre. You can't show everyone just how clever you are until you're grown up." Her mother had said it was the only way she could survive. Well, the tables had turned now, hadn't they? Little did Anthony know how successful she'd become. She just needed to get her son back, and her life would be complete. I really hated the Smiths' behaviour. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be humouring Angela now either. Anthony realised he'd said too much, so he quickly changed the subject, looking flustered. "Oh, why am I saying such things? Where are you from, Miss Anderson?" Nora made up an answer. "New York." The Andersons from New York? Anthony swallowed hard. That was a powerful family, even more so than the Hunts. Anthony was impressed. He fawned over her even more. "I didn't realize you came from such a wealthy family. No wonder you're so elegant and charming." Nora ignored his attempt at a compliment and continued to sound him out. She acted casual, but her grip around her coffee cup had tightened slightly. "I heard that your fiancé gave birth to a child 5 years ago, but it was abandoned. I'm really curious. Where did that child go?" Anthony was dismissive. "That's just a rumour, Miss Anderson. No one was abandoned. My fiancé took the child abroad." What the Smiths had announced publicly at the time was that Nora had given birth to a baby girl. They hadn't mentioned that she'd actually had twins. After all, they'd been ostracised and humiliated. defensive tower. Go. I'm out of health points. Hey, why are you running? Tank the damage for me and I'll be able to get the 5 kills. I'll die. Oh, come on, you wuss. It's only a game. What are you so afraid of? Cherry was usually very cute and well-behaved, but once she started playing games on her phone, she quickly became bad-tempered and impatient. In fact, even the tirade she was launching at the other child was relatively mild and self-restrained compared to how she could be. Who's that kid she's playing with, though? Nora's curiosity was piqued. Nora walked into the living room and saw Cherry in her pajamas holding her cell phone. She was sitting cross-legged and playing happily. When she heard the door open, the little girl turned and looked over. Sensing that her mum was about to get mad, Cherry put on a bright smile and blinked her big round eyes. "Mummy, you're finally back. I was so bored. I missed you so much." Nora sighed silently. I guess me not having much time to spend with her is why she ends up playing on that phone so much. She resisted her drowsiness and the desire to immediately jump into bed and sleep forever. Instead, she said, "Come on, Cherry, let's have dinner out tonight." Mrs. Lewis asked, "What would you like to wear tonight, Cherry?" Cherry thought about it seriously. "The little grey Gucci suit." Nora frowned. "Are you wearing boys' clothes again?" Cherry was a quirky child. She liked going out dressed as a little boy. She continued to stare at the phone. "Uh-huh. This round's ending soon, Mummy. What are we having?" Nora reached over and grabbed the cell phone before answering. "We're having pizza downstairs." She turned off the game. "Hey, we're raiding soon. Cherry was about to throw a tantrum, but when her eyes met Nora's, she pursed her lips and squeezed out 3 words through gritted teeth. "Fine. Let's go." In the room next door, Pete stared at his cell phone. Sweet Cherry had logged off the game and disconnected the call. He felt a small sense of loss at the bottom of his heart. Chester Hunt, who was sitting on the sofa, breathed a sigh of relief at the sight. "Thank God, kiddo, you're done at last. My grumpy brother is coming back soon, so let's hurry up and get this place tidy." Peter looked at him sullenly and didn't reply. Chester came over and looked at his phone. "Who are you playing with?" "Hey, don't sulk. I'll play with you sometime. I'm really good. I'm in the top 10 rankings on the local server. Our team leader, Sweet Cherry, is top. The 2 of us are online buddies. I'll get him to let you join and we can play together next time." Pete turned off the screen and stood up. "Uncle Chester, I want to have pizza." Chester felt a headache coming on. "Come on, kiddo, don't push it. Justin's not going to agree to that." Pete was the only grandson of the Hunts, and as such, he was treated like a VIP. His daily schedule was meticulously planned out, every moment busy and strictly controlled. As Justin wasn't around today, and Chester felt sorry for the poor little nephew of his, he'd indulged him and let him play games all afternoon. But eating out, that would definitely test the limits of Justin's patience. Chester continued to dissuade him. "You forced him to take you out for cake yesterday by refusing to take your medication, but that's not going to work twice. Come on, kiddo, work with me here." Pete didn't listen to his uncle. He went to the bedroom and opened the closet. He was about to grab a random outfit when he spotted the limited edition grey Gucci suit. He impulsively put it on and walked to the door. Chester tried to stop him. "Your dad's downstairs, he'll see you." Pete looked at him coolly. It'll be fine so long as he's not at the door." Chester watched him leave, feeling an impending sense of doom. 1 minute later, Justin opened the door and strode in, his presence as strong as ever. As he entered, Chester greeted him weakly, terrified. "Justin!" Justin paused in taking off his coat. His inky eyes swept across the room, and his expression darkened. "Where's Pete?" He didn't sound happy. Chester became even more scared. "He's gone to the pizza place downstairs." Justin spun round angrily to head back out the door, catching Chester off guard. He shouted, "I know it's my fault, Justin. Hold back Justin had already left. Chester thought he'd had a narrow escape and heaved a sigh of relief. He shuddered when he heard his brother call back along the corridor, "I'll deal with you when I get back." The pizzas at Hotel Finest were expensive but delicious. There were so many toppings, and you could have any flavour you wanted. Nora grabbed a menu and walked toward the empty tables with Cherry skipping along behind her. She looked awfully handsome dressed in her little suit, and there was a sly look in her spirited eyes. "Mummy, I'll go look at the cakes." "Okay," Nora called after her. A moment later, she looked up to see her daughter standing in front of her, staring at her with wide eyes. Pete had only been trying his luck. He hadn't really expected to meet her again. Joy sparked in his eyes for the first time in his life. Nora asked in confusion, "Did you not find the cake counter, baby?" Pete blushed. His grandparents called him that at home occasionally, but this woman's voice sounded so affectionate. His eyes turned red and he asked her quietly, "Are you my mummy?" Nora was puzzled. What was wrong with Cherry? Why was she acting so strangely? Is it because I logged her off her game just now? Surely not. She bent over and stroked the child's head. Chuckling slightly, she gave up. "Okay, it's all Mummy's fault. What do you want to have? I'll order for you, okay?" The child held up the menu. "How about pepperoni?" Pete's eyes widened. "It really is, Mummy." He had so many questions he wanted to ask. Why did you abandon me? Where have you been all these years? But he swallowed them down before they tumbled out of him. He'd grown up being taken care of by Justin and had difficulty expressing his feelings. He could only nod heavily. Yeah. Nora was completely unaware of her mix-up and how complicated the boy's emotions were. She still thought he was Cherry. She took his hand and walked to a quiet, inconspicuous table in the corner. Cherry, who was lingering at the cake counter, looked at the mousse cake, then the Black Forest cake, unable to decide. In the end, and only after she'd decided that she'd have both, she turned to head back to her mother. As she turned around, she saw a man walking towards her aggressively. He stretched out a strong arm, picked her up, and forcibly carried her toward the restaurant exit. "You can't eat this, it's all junk food." Cherry struggled fiercely. "Who are you? Let go of me. Help, someone's kidnapping me." The noise attracted a lot of attention. People gasped and stared. Justin's good upbringing took over. He regained his composure, aware he shouldn't be causing a scene in public. He snapped at the child he thought was his son. "I'm your father." We're at it again. Justin was domineering. Everything was fine when Pete was obedient, but he could also be stubborn and obstinate. After all, like father, like son. Once he refused to behave, chaos would always inevitably ensue, and it was left to Chester to negotiate peace. He was just thinking of calling his parents for backup when he noticed that Justin had stopped in his tracks. Chester watched in surprise. This didn't normally happen. Justin was frozen to the spot, still holding the child. Cherry was crying hard and her sobs racked her tiny little body. She touched Justin's face with her hand. "Dad, you're my daddy." Justin was at a loss for words. His son always had a sullen look on his face, but now the child seemed a lot more animated. Big teardrops rolled down from dark eyes, accompanied with distressed wails. It made Justin feel extraordinarily helpless. He had no idea why his son was so emotional. Hey, calm down. Stop crying," Justin said hoarsely. He stretched out his hand awkwardly, trying to wipe the tears away. A soft little hand grabbed his fingers instead. "Daddy." Cherry was overwhelmed. She finally had a father. She was no longer a child that had popped up by some unexplained magic. Although Cherry was lively and outgoing, she had always felt terribly envious every time she had seen other children being lifted high into the air by their fathers. The soft voice caused Justin to swallow back the cliched "real men don't cry" line he'd been about to resort to. He's only 5. He's still just a child. Justin's usually hard heart softened. Instead, he chided gently. "Oh, really now? Crying and making a fuss just because of some food?" He put the child back on the ground. Cherry clasped his large hand tightly, as though she was afraid he'd disappear. She looked up and said, "Let's have dinner together, Daddy." Justin looked at his watch. "I only have an hour." Chester watched them speechlessly. Until now, Pete had gone home hungry and accepted punishment, instead of pushing his luck. Something must have changed in him. Cherry was terribly excited. She had found such a handsome father. She didn't stop to question this life-changing revelation. She chatted to him constantly. "Eat this, Daddy. This is expensive. Don't drink so much juice, Daddy. It's too filling. You won't have space to eat much." Justin stared solemnly at this child who was behaving like a totally different person from his son. Chester, who joined them, whispered jokingly, "Justin, has Pete had a personality transplant?" After they'd eaten, Cherry took Justin's hand and walked toward the table in the corner. "Daddy, look, Mummy's over there." Justin looked where she was pointing and saw the woman again. She was leaning against the comfortable sofa in the corner, not paying attention to anything going on around her. She rested her head on one hand as she ate absent-mindedly, chasing the food around her plate with a fork. She was undeniably charming and had beautiful pianist's fingers. A child sat opposite her, only the top of their hair visible to Justin. He assumed it was her daughter. Justin stopped staring and bent down to look at Cherry solemnly. "She's not your mummy." "Yes, she is. She is my mummy." Justin studied the child and said harshly, "Remember this. Don't ever trust any woman, especially a beautiful one." Cherry's eyes widened in outrage. Why won't he accept Mummy? She started crying again, only this time they were hot, angry tears of sadness, not joy. "If you don't recognize her as my mummy, then you're not my father." Justin was getting increasingly cross, and his face showed it. His brain whirred as he thought, how has that woman bewitched my son to make him say something like that? He suddenly realized something and asked, "Did you come down here together?" Cherry replied, "Of course." It was as he'd suspected. It seemed clear to him now. Why else would he suddenly want pizza? Justin scoffed to himself. That woman had been flirting with another man this afternoon, and now she was once again trying to seduce him by using his son. It seemed the verbal warning he'd given her the previous night hadn't been enough. He spoke more forcefully this time. "You're not to talk to her anymore." Cherry looked sadly over at her mother in confusion, then up at her big, tall father. In the end, she gritted her teeth and headed toward the exit with Justin. She wanted to help her mummy bring Daddy home, and she jabbered away at him as they headed to collect his coat. "Daddy, isn't my mummy good looking? She's so much prettier than lots of celebrities. If you get together again, think how good you'll look. You'll make such an impressive couple." Justin stared at him in wonder. What on earth had that woman said to my son? Nora was close to falling asleep. She was curious as to why her daughter seemed to have been so exceptionally sensible the whole evening. She was usually such a fussy eater, but she hadn't picked anything off her pizza. She'd eaten the whole thing. Nora also couldn't understand why she was eating so slowly. That was different too. She was slightly worried. "Have you eaten enough yet?" Pete rubbed his belly. He knew that he'd probably be grounded by his dad when he got back upstairs, but he dawdled for over an hour because he was reluctant to part with his mummy now he'd found her. In response to her question, he smiled shyly and said, "I think I want another piece of cake." "Go ahead." Nora smiled back at him and then sank further into the comfy sofa and closed her eyes. Cherry had taken the opportunity to sneak back in and check on her mother, while Justin and Chester were collecting their belongings. When she saw how sleepy she looked, she felt guilty. Her mum had been working so hard lately, and coming out for dinner with her was taking time out of her sleep schedule. They hadn't even eaten together in the end. She shouldn't have gone with Daddy and left Mummy here. Cherry walked over and sighed. "Are you sleepy, Mummy? Let's go back upstairs." "She's finally full," thought Nora as she stretched. "Okay." They left the restaurant holding hands. A minute later, Pete came back from the cake counter and saw the empty table. The light in his eyes slowly dimmed and his shoulders slumped. His father's deep voice spoke behind him. "Time's up. Where did you disappear to?" Pete's tiny body trembled. He turned around and saw his dad standing impatiently behind him. He almost shrank back in fear, knowing he'd be scolded for the evening's escapade. But the next moment, Justin bent over and picked him up. He even asked, "Are you full?" Pete was surprised by his dad's unusual behavior. He was expecting to be yelled at, not hugged. Why isn't he angry? Maybe he's decided to be nicer to me from now on. Nora was about to go to bed when the doorbell rang. She asked impatiently, "Who is it?" An unfamiliar male voice replied, "Miss Smith, my name is Hunt." "Hunt?" Nora got up. "Open the door, Cherry." "Mummy, I'm in the middle of a fierce team battle," said Cherry, not looking up from her phone. She continued to diss her teammates angrily. "Be careful of the one at the back. Hey, Chesty, how many times have you died already? Why are you so rubbish at this game?" Rolling her eyes at her daughter's enthusiasm for the violent game, Nora walked over to open the door herself. It wasn't Justin standing outside, but a younger man. He looked about 20 years old. He was wearing casual clothes and slouched against the wall playing a game on his cell phone. His eyes were similar to Justin's but brighter, and he looked harmless. In fact, he looked exactly like she would expect a well-brought-up boy from a rich family to look. When he saw her opening the door, Chester lowered his voice and spoke into the phone. "Leader, I'm already dead anyway, so play this round without me." He turned it off and raised his head to look at Nora. She was astonishingly beautiful. Her cat-like eyes looked sleepy though, and her voice was low as she asked, "Is something the matter?" Chester said, "Miss Smith, there's something delicate I'd like to discuss with you. We need you to give up this presidential suite and move to one downstairs." Nora raised her eyebrows. "Why?" He held out a check. "I'm afraid I can't disclose the reason behind this decision, but let me assure you it has not been taken lightly. As you are no doubt aware, this hotel belongs to the Hunts. According to our regulations, if we cancel a booking without reason, we'll pay double for breaching the contract. The check's for $5,000. Nora stared at the check wordlessly. "Do I look like I'm strapped for cash or something? Why is everyone trying to buy me off?" Seeing that she wasn't giving in, Chester turned more threatening. "If you don't agree, then I'll have to ask security to throw you out. I'm sure you don't want things to escalate like that, right?" How dare he threaten me? The look in Nora's eyes turned cold. Chester cracked and finally revealed the reason why she needed to leave the room. "Miss Smith, you've been trying to seduce my older brother, Justin. I'm cutting you some slack because it isn't easy raising a child on your own. Otherwise, I wouldn't just be stopping at just changing your room reservation." Trying to seduce his brother. Nora yawned. His accusations were so misguided. He clearly wasn't interested in understanding the real reason she was here. "I'm curious. How have I tried to seduce him?" Chester was angry now. The audacity of this woman. "Didn't you spend a ton of money to stay in this room right next door to him so you could take advantage of the proximity? You've managed to deceive Pete, but he's a child. I'm not that stupid. I've looked into you. Your fiancé broke off your engagement and you were unmarried when you gave birth. What makes a woman like you think you're worthy of my brother?" Whoa, have I missed something? How am I in the wrong just by staying next door? What makes Justin so superior? Nora was fed up. "So no one's worthy of staying in this room, is that it?" Chester wasn't keen on her change of attitude. His reply was sarcastic. "Of course not. My brother has discovered that Dr. Athena is staying in this hotel. When he finds her, he'll invite her to stay here. Only distinguished guests like that deserve to stay next door to my brother." Nora was puzzled. How did they find out Athena was staying here, but not that I'm her? She wasn't afraid of Justin, but getting entangled with a man like that would be problematic. She thought for a moment. Then she took the check from Chester's hand and said lightly, "Thank you. Send someone up to help us with the transfer." Chester breathed a sigh of relief, thank goodness for that. The new suite downstairs wasn't as good as the two top-class ones up here, but it was plenty big enough for 3 people. Most importantly, the new keycard wouldn't allow access to the top floor, meaning she wouldn't have any chance of running into Pete anymore, let alone Justin. Why did she thank me, though? Chester was perplexed as he returned to his own room, but he decided to think no more of it. He reported to Justin, saying, "You don't have to thank me, Justin. This favor to you makes up for my mistake earlier with Pete." Justin was sitting at a large desk, both hands tapping away quickly on a keyboard. Without even looking up, he chided him in a low voice. "Why are you causing trouble?" Chester frowned. Why was he detecting dissatisfaction in his brother's words? He thought he'd done the right thing for once. He went to join Justin and saw that the computer screen was covered in intertwined lines. Among them, a red dot was moving slowly. It was Dr. Athena, the person Justin had been keeping tabs on for half an hour, tracking her movements. Suddenly, the red dot flashed a few times and disappeared. "You've lost her, Justin," said Chester before he could stop himself. Justin swore and glared at his brother. "I can see that," he growled. Chester instantly shut up. Lawrence glanced at Chester and sighed inwardly. The Hunt family was so complicated, and all Justin's other relatives were like him, highly intelligent and hard to read. How had they produced such a simpleton? He coughed and said, "Mr. Hunt, why would she suddenly go offline at this critical moment? Do we have a traitor?" Justin shook his head. He'd been tracking her himself this time, as finding her was so crucial. Her surgical skills were invaluable to his family. Only the three of them in that room, himself, Chester, and Lawrence, knew about his desire to find her. There's no way Athena could have been tipped off. It must have been a coincidence. The hotel was very efficient. Half an hour later, Nora was already settled in the study of her new suite. After she'd successfully blocked an external attack, she called Solo, who tried to explain. "Sorry, Mr. Hunt found a top-class hacker from somewhere and got information on you from me. At the moment, he's only found out that you're staying at the Hotel Finest. Your exact location hasn't been exposed yet." Said Nora. "Be more careful next time." She hung up and went to check on Cherry. The child was seemingly already asleep in her new bedroom. Nora went to her own room and collapsed on the bed, finally able to sleep, exhausted after her full-on day. 2 minutes later, Cherry eased her bedroom door open and poked her head out. After confirming that her mother was asleep, she gently closed the door, took out her cell phone, and logged back onto her game. Chester was relieved. "You're finally back, leader. Where have you been?" Cherry groaned. "Ugh, the idiot next door demanded we change rooms, totally out of the blue." "What? Which idiot is that? How dare they bully our leader? I hope he chokes to death on a glass of water." Chester didn't think any more of it after that. After all, you meet all kinds of strange people when staying in hotels. "Didn't you say yesterday that you're back in California after living abroad all this time? I've come all this way to look for you. Where are you staying? The top-class suite next to mine just so happens to be vacant. It's on me." They hadn't found Athena yet, so it was still empty. In response, he heard Sweet Cherry scolding him. "Get into position, Chesty. Even the monsters in the river are better than you at getting into their positions." It was only after she'd scolded him that she replied, "I'm staying at the Hotel Finest." Chester spluttered and started coughing violently. Once he'd recovered his breath, he said, "I'm in Hotel Finest too. I'll come to you." "Okay." Cherry and Chesty had known each other for over 6 months. They got along well and were good friends. They'd already planned to meet when she got back to the States, so she agreed as soon as Chester suggested the idea. "Which room are you in?" he asked eagerly. Cherry was about to tell him when she suddenly thought of something. "Not tonight, my mum's asleep. Let's meet tomorrow instead." He laughed. "Everyone says you sound like a little girl because you're using a voice changer and that you're really a grumpy middle-aged man. Can you at least tell me whether you're a man or a woman?" Cherry grinned. "It's a secret." The humidity in California was mild in winter and dry in summer, making it just right for sleeping comfortably. With the curtains closed, Nora's room was completely dark. She slept soundly. It was the middle of the day when she finally opened her eyes. Cherry and Mrs. Lewis had already had lunch, so she ordered herself takeout. Down at the hotel entrance, Angela watched Anthony enter the lobby. He was in a hurry. She clenched her fists. Over the past few days, Anthony's attitude had been perfunctory whenever she'd called, and all he'd talked to her about was ideally in pharmaceuticals. She could sense that something was wrong. So she trailed him this morning, not expecting him to lead her here. Hotel Finest was one of the most expensive upmarket places in California. Angela quietly followed him in and watched him go to the bar on the first floor. He approached some waiters, took out some cash and handed it to them. "You know what you're supposed to do, right? Watch out for my signals tonight." "Yes, sir." They left, and Anthony nervously took a deep breath before taking out his phone and drafting a message. "Hello, Miss Anderson. Sorry if this is presumptuous, but I got your number from the hotel bar. Please meet me there at 8 p.m. After sending this text, he looked at the setup in front of him with satisfaction. He wasn't clear on how he'd offended the pretty woman when he last saw her, but he was confident she would definitely fall for him this time. After all, no woman would be able to resist a romantic move like this. She didn't respond to his message. After a few minutes, Anthony messaged out to his friends. 8 p.m. tonight, Hotel Finest Bar. Be there or be square. He'd reserved the whole place and he wanted his friends to come and cheer him on. But he didn't realise that he'd accidentally sent Angela the message too. Angela's phone buzzed in her hand. She looked down at the message that had just arrived. Anthony left the bar and the waiters whispered to each other. What's Mr. Gray up to? He's prepared a huge surprise. He must be intending to propose, right? Whoever he's getting engaged to is so lucky. Angela's cheeks turned pink in embarrassment as she listened to them speculate and reread the message from Anthony. How could she have suspected that he was being unfaithful? She really should have trusted him. She couldn't help laughing. His tone was exactly the same as any other message. If she hadn't secretly seen all the preparations, she would never have imagined he'd arranged something special for her. She walked out of the bar in a good mood. Then she spotted Nora, who had come downstairs to pick up her takeout. Despite being in her pajamas and slippers and looking half asleep still, she was incredibly attractive. Everyone in the lobby was watching her. How can she possibly afford to stay here? Angela thought enviously, her fists clenching again. She must be pretending to be rich. Her jealousy got the better of her, and she took a couple of steps toward Nora. You don't even have clothes anymore, yet you still insist on staying in this hotel. What's the plan? Seduce some rich guy? Look at yourself. Do you really think you can trick people into spending money on you just based on your looks? Nora, who was carrying her takeout in one hand and her cell phone in the other, looked confused at Angela's sudden outbursts. She deleted Anthony's texts. Then she replied, at least I have a face I'm proud of. Her cat-like eyes swept across Angela's face disdainfully as she insulted her. Angela was infuriated. Is she saying I'm shameless or implying I'm ugly? Or wait, is it both? She narrowed her eyes but then smiled suddenly. Nora, do you want to know where that abandoned child of yours is? If you do, then I'll see you at the bar at 8 p.m. So what if she's pretty now? Anthony dumped her and picked me. Angela wanted Nora to see with her own eyes how Anthony was going to propose to her. She turned and left. Nora watched her go. 8 p.m. at the bar again. What's going on? I'll see what my precious little sister and ex-fiancé have prepared, she thought as she went back upstairs with the takeout. After lunch, Nora was busy all afternoon. Mrs. Lewis made a healthy dinner. The new suite wasn't the best, but it still had a decent kitchen. Cherry was growing. They mustn't eat out all the time. As she sat at the table, Nora noticed that Cherry looked troubled. The girl sighed deeply. Mummy, I'm bored. Nora stroked her face and asked, Why aren't you playing your games, baby? It's the weekend, Cherry explained. All the school kids are on holiday. Nora smiled. She often felt that Cherry might have forgotten that she was just a kindergartner. She passed Cherry her food and asked, What do you want to do? I'll spend some time with you. It's fine, Mummy, you're busy. Cherry put on her sensible face and her round eyes darted about. Can you get Mrs. Lewis to walk round the hotel with me tonight at 8? Nora pretended not to notice her daughter trying to be sneaky and chuckled softly. Sure. Her daughter was very cheeky and always coming up with all sorts of eccentric ideas. She'd also always been a smart, sensible child and never let anyone take advantage of her. Nora didn't need to worry about her going for a walk with Mrs. Lewis. As 8 p.m. approached, they finished eating, tidied up, and got ready to leave the room. They split up once they got out into the hallway. Nora headed down to the bar. Cherry watched her mum get in the elevator before taking out her phone and sending a message. "Chesty, I'm ready. Where are you?" Chester's reply came almost instantly. "Table 28 at the cafe on the first floor. I'll be waiting for you here." Cherry grinned. "Okie dokie, I'll be there right away." The bar on the first floor of the hotel was already bubbling with voices. Anthony was quite well known across California. The friends he had invited to the party had all brought even more friends along, filling up the bar. The bright lights shining across the entire bar blurred the scene. Men and women twisted their bodies fervently on the dance floor. Angela, dressed in a long red gown, was sitting in the corner with a drink in her hand. Her cheeks were bright and rosy. She was surrounded by her usual group of fair-weather friends, who took turns complimenting her. "Hotel Finest is not cheap, Angela. Anthony must have big plans in mind, right? Is he going to propose?" "He must be proposing, I'm sure of it. Isn't your sister back? That's the end of it, right? Their engagement can officially be considered cancelled." "It's all her fault. She spent all those years hiding abroad, refusing to do anything about the engagement. You could have married Anthony a long time ago if not for her." "Hey, what is she doing here?" Alarmed, Angela turned to look toward the entrance. Nora had dressed just as casually that evening as in the previous days since her return to California. She was wearing comfortably fitted jeans and a black t-shirt that set off the skin around her neck, making it look so fair that it practically glowed white. She was expressionless. Her eyes were slightly lidded, and she gave off a world-weary attitude. Yet her looks were eye-catching and beautiful. She drew the attention of the entire party as soon as she entered the room. The moment she walked into the bar, a waiter rushed to the back to hiss to Anthony, "Mr. Gray, she's here." Anthony stood up immediately. "This is it. Get ready." The loud music in the bar gave Nora a headache, and she was quickly filled with an overwhelming sense of irritation. She looked around the bar indifferently. When she spotted Angela, she headed over toward her. Before she had made it very far, she heard her sister sneer pretentiously, "Why are you here, Nora? Anthony will never agree to meet you." Her friends were quick to chime in. "Nora, you must have heard that Anthony is going to propose tonight. Don't make a scene. You were the one who screwed around, cheating and getting yourself pregnant before the wedding. That's why Anthony dumped you. Are you here to harass him again? Aren't you ashamed? Even if you are a little prettier now, you've still got your kid to deal with. Why would he ever pay attention to you? Just give it up." Their voices were loud and hateful, but the music was much louder. It quickly drowned out many of their spiteful words, meaning that the standoff between Nora and Angela's followers didn't really attract much attention from the rest of the crowd. Nora wasn't interested in what they had to say. She focused on Angela. "Tell me where my son is." Angela approached her with a sardonic smile. She pointed to the sofa and spoke so that only the two of them could hear. "Nora, if you sit down nicely, watch tonight's show all the way through, give me and Anthony your blessing for everyone to hear, if you do that, I'll tell you." Now Nora understood. Angela wanted to use the marriage proposal scene to humiliate her. Nora knew she didn't have a chance. The private investigators she'd engaged didn't have any leads at all. So as long as there was a glimmer of hope, she was unwilling to give up. Nora sat on the sofa and leaned back. She closed her eyes, her long eyelashes casting shadows on her cheeks as she uttered, "If this is really all you care about, then fine." Angela stared at her fiercely. She didn't understand how her sister could stay so calm. It made her look so foolish in comparison every time. She clenched her fists, searching for something to hurt Nora with. Suddenly, she said, "Hey, Nora, don't you ever wonder what things would have been like if you hadn't been fat? If you'd always been this pretty, would Anthony even have broken off your engagement in the first place?" Nora's eyes suddenly flew open, and they glinted sharply as she glared daggers at Angela. "What did you say to me?" Her obesity had been caused by hormonal injections in her childhood. Years later, she had discovered that her original prescription had been wrong. But knowing that now didn't lessen the pain she had felt struggling with her body as she grew up. Even though she had worked so hard to lose weight and suffered so much, her efforts had been useless for so long. Once she had finally stopped the medication, her body had needed time and careful attention to repair from the damage. Seeing that Nora's expression had finally changed, Angela laughed arrogantly. With a venomous look in her eyes, she said, "We're both Smiths, so why should you be the one to marry into the Greys? We had to do something to even things out. Messing with your meds worked out perfectly in the long run, just like Mom said it would. Look around. Sure enough, Anthony has fallen in love with me." Nora was stunned at Angela's words. Is she really saying that she and her mother purposefully did that to me? And Angela continued, heedless of Nora's reaction. "It really doesn't matter that you've slimmed down now. It's too late. What a waste of that face of yours. If you weren't stuck with that kid, you might have been able to find another man. But now?" Anger roiled in Nora's eyes. She couldn't believe anyone could be so vicious. She had only been 5 when she'd been put on that hormone treatment. She was on the edge of losing her temper. Suddenly, all the lights in the bar went out and the music came to an abrupt stop. 2 seconds later, a white spotlight shone at the center of the dance floor. Anthony was standing in the light, wearing a white suit, looking as handsome and elegant as ever. He was holding a guitar in his hands. The moment he appeared, everyone in the bar screamed, "Anthony, Anthony." Everyone in the bar, men and women, cheered and shouted his name. Everyone except Nora and Angela. He smiled and then stretched out a finger and gestured for the crowd to quiet down. A hush instantly fell over the room. He strummed the guitar a few times and a melody began to take form. He gently hummed a popular, familiar love song. Although it wasn't exactly a pro performance, it was a decent rendition. Angela stood up, tears flowing freely down her face. She couldn't believe it. This night was magic. He's so handsome, and he's mine. After finishing the song, Anthony put down the guitar. He held up the microphone and said, "I booked this whole place and got so many friends to join in today because I've got a special message for a certain somebody. From the very first moment I laid eyes on you, I knew you were extraordinary." "Yeah, Anthony, Anthony!" Everyone cheered again, building up the atmosphere to a climax. Anthony gave a wave. Immediately, a few pops sounded, and the balloons on the ceiling burst, scattering the room with a shower of rose petals from above. Angela covered her mouth. Her eyes were filled with joyful surprise. This is so romantic. She turned to the side excitedly and sneered at Nora. "Do you see this? Anthony never did anything like this for you. Look at everything he does for me. I'm worth 10 of you." Angela felt like she was flying. Her heart only soared higher when she recognized the envy in the eyes of the other girls around her. She felt like she was going to burst from happiness. Then, she saw Anthony slowly walking step by step toward her with a bouquet of roses in his hands. The surrounding crowd cleared a path for him, like an ocean parting. Angela straightened her back. She couldn't help but take a few steps toward him. She knew this day was the highlight of her life. She didn't notice that Anthony only had eyes for someone else. Even in the dimly lit bar, the woman sitting on the sofa was dazzling and eye-catching. He wasn't aware of anyone else, even Angela. All he could think was, this is dramatic enough to be a proposal. She has to at least let me take her out on a date, right? Angela stopped a few steps away from him. Watching him come nearer and nearer, her smile blossomed uncontrollably. This is it. He's about to get down on one knee. It's happening. Angela watched in utter confusion, unable to process what was happening, as Anthony walked past her and stopped in front of Nora instead. He bent down and offered Nora the roses in a suave gesture. "Miss Anderson, may I have the honor of making your acquaintance?" Angela's eyes widened in astonishment as she stared at the scene in disbelief. It was difficult to see in the dim light of the bar, which made her feel as if she were dreaming. She couldn't understand why Anthony had bypassed her and gone up to Nora. Nora definitely hadn't expected such a dramatic twist either. She had only seen Anthony twice since returning to California. Was he seriously dumping Angela his prospective fiancé, to try and come after her instead? Glancing over Anthony's shoulders, she saw how surprised and furious Angela looked. The sight of her helped Nora calm down a little. She had been so upset that the horrible revelation that Angela and her stepmother had been responsible for her poor health as a child. This revenge was too sweet. The corners of her lips curled upward into a mischievous smile. Her smile, which was as bright and dazzling as a blooming sunflower, made Anthony's eyes light up. He was about to say something, but Angela couldn't control herself anymore. She screamed, "Anthony!" It was only when he heard her voice that Anthony finally noticed Angela standing behind him. He frowned and asked, "What are you doing here?" Angela was still fantasizing that perhaps Anthony had mistaken someone else for her in the darkness. But his question shattered her hopes. She glared at Nora angrily. "You bitch. You can't have him." She raised her hand to strike Nora. Anthony immediately jumped in to stop her. With a stern look, he snapped, "What are you doing, Angela? Don't make a scene." Angela's cheeks flushed angrily. "Are you actually defending her? Do you know?" "Enough," Anthony interrupted her. "Look at yourself, Angela. You're a mess. Can't you be more like Miss Anderson? Try getting some of her charm and charisma." Angela was stunned. "Who did you say she was? Don't you know who she is?" Anthony was taken aback by her question. "She's Isabel Anderson." He turned to the side to see Nora leaning back leisurely on the sofa. With her lips curled into a smile, she said lazily, "Isabel is my middle name. I also have another name, Nora Smith." The whole bar suddenly fell quiet for a moment. Everyone was getting more and more confused. Anthony stared at her in disbelief. "You..." He was so shocked that he could not think of anything to say. Angela managed to react, however. "She's tricked you, Anthony. She's tricked us both. She did it on purpose just to make you look ridiculous. She's turning us into a joke." Nora had ruined her magical proposal. Angela really hated her guts now. Angela shouted to everyone around her, "What are you all just standing around for? Get her! She's ruined everything." Lots of the people in the bar were friends with Angela as well as Anthony. In response to her cries, they began to surround Nora. At the sight of so many people crowding around her, Nora stretched and rolled her shoulders, warming up for the scene she knew was about to come. Meanwhile, Justin had just entered the lobby. He was about to go straight to the elevator when he heard a commotion in the bar. Through the glass walls, he immediately spotted the woman on the sofa. There was a little more frostiness than usual in her perpetually distant expression. There was malice on the faces of everyone around her. From the looks of things, it seemed she was about to be assaulted by the whole group. Seeing that they were about to start, Justin diverted his path and entered the bar. "Stop!" Nora had been just about to jump into action, but the sound of Justin's deep, fierce voice made her pause. He strode into the bar, followed by a team of well-trained bodyguards. In no time, they had taken control of the situation. Justin looked as elegant and commanding as ever. He was wearing a luxurious bespoke hand-tailored suit. His stance and expression exuded a chilly, menacing aura. His cold eyes swept across the place, and he slowly said, "No kind of brawling or fighting is tolerated in Hotel Finest." Nora, who had only just gotten into the mood to fight, slumped back on the couch. "Gee," she thought, laughing a little to herself. "That guy sure has a lot of rules." It was affecting her performance. The entire crowd was frozen, intimidated by Justin's overpowering aura. Anthony, thinking he could still be the one calling the shots, braced himself and asked, "Who are you?" Lawrence, who was following closely behind Justin, answered, "This is Mr. Hunt." Mr. Hunt from Hotel Finest? Justin Hunt, the owner himself.